Hopefully certainly the conference started off really well yesterday. We had a good afternoon yesterday, so and hopefully today is just as good. My name is Ian Walker, and I'm the chairman of the Deer Industry New Zealand, the industry body for deer farmers, processors and marketers. Alongside our chief executive, Dan Coup, I'm going to take a few minutes to provide a quick State of the Nation address to set the scene a little bit for where we are at as an industry. The theme for this year's conference is staying ahead of the game. There's a little bit of a pun there, which is not really intended. We don't really want to think about venison as game. Certainly, it's a smaller part of our industry. But the main point of that theme was that we're in a good spot as an industry, and we need to keep working hard to maintain our advantage. We should be happy, but never satisfied. My predecessor, Andy McFarlane, enjoyed a good rugby metaphor, and I thought that would be appropriate here as well. When you see the captain of the All Blacks or the Hurricanes, or what's the local team called? Crusaders. When you see them interviewed after a game, there's some standard phrases, isn't there? It becomes pretty obvious. It was a great team effort and I'm proud of the boys. Or, we're happy to win, but we were far from perfect and we have plenty to work on. And the other one that you hear is, we'll enjoy the celebration tonight, but then tomorrow, or maybe this afternoon, we'll start focusing on next week's game. So if we consider the last 12 months for the deer industry as a win, and I think the All Black formula is pretty spot on for how we should be thinking right now, it's been a great team effort. I'd like to recognise the work that's been done by the DINZ executive and Chief Executive Dan and the board who've supported us. We all know the real hard yards is put in by those people, but it doesn't exclude those that are on the farm, in the processing plants, or the overseas developing markets for our products. So it's been a great team effort, and maybe the DINZ could be regarded as the physio, or they carry the water and the ice. We're happy to have a good year in the industry, and Dan will go through a few slides on that shortly. But there are still many work-ons for us as a team and as an industry. We've made progress, but there's a long way to go. Hope we have a good night tonight and celebrate a successful year, but then tomorrow we need to start thinking about the next set of challenges. What are our plans to make sure we stay ahead of the game and have another win next time round? So that's how DINZ is thinking about the state of the nation for the deer industry. Dan's got a few more slides that will hopefully illustrate those points in a bit more detail. And then after that, we'll open these reports up for discussion. So, Dan, over to you.
Thanks, Ian. Those lights are still really bright. So, just picking up on Ian's theme there, a good result, and like to acknowledge the effort made right across the board to contribute to that. A bit of a performance review. So, as Graham Henry or Steve would do after a good win, they still go through the performance and they say, how did everyone actually go, despite the fact we won? And then what are the challenges ahead? What's next week's game look like? And what do we got to do to prepare for that? So on that first one, a good result, we think, and a team effort. Without dwelling on this too much, I think we should acknowledge that it has been a good year. You can see there a chart of protein prices at the farm gate in New Zealand for the last 12 or 15 years. The purple line at the top is venison pricing. It's pretty positive. Farmers used to say to me that what they needed was a $2 margin compared to lamb. At the moment, you've got about a $4 margin there, so hopefully people are pleased with that. And to be fair, venison's actually been performing pretty well over the last few years. On the velvet side, I'll get in trouble with Reese if I don't explain carefully that that last year, that little bit of a dip there was to do with some regulatory factors. We're outside the industry's control largely, but the performance on velvet's been pretty good again, for getting on for 10 years now. And this last season's been another really positive one. So people in the velvet business have worked hard for that. Doesn't happen by accident, and hopefully, the deer farmers are enjoying that result. So team effort, what's happened on farm, you can see there average carcass weights, which is one of the kind of crude measures we've got for performance on farm, and you can see those carcass weights over the last couple of years have increased by up to sort of 2 kilos. So, team effort, we've got to acknowledge the work that people are doing on farm to produce those results as well. And there's the other little crude measure we've got about on-farm performance there is, fawning success. And again, that's a pretty early indicator, but it's certainly going in the right direction. So again, team effort. So we know people on farm work pretty hard. We know people in the processing plant work pretty hard. And this is just a little picture for you to acknowledge that marketers actually work pretty hard too. This is a young guy called Hunter McGregor who's working with Mountain River Venison, and he's actually burning shoe leather, trying to persuade Shanghai people that they should be trying out some venison as well. So there's hard work that's gone on right the way across the board. So I'd really like to acknowledge the effort that's gone in by everyone in our team. But there'll be a lot of questions in the room, and I'm not one to shirk the hard questions. How much has the good result we've had come as a result of our performance, of our hard work, and how much has it been a result of us playing the Sunwolves? So we've had a little bit of assistance there by other factors that weren't related to hard work. That's a picture of the venison slaughter over the last few years. You can see that we had that dip, I think, when people's confidence started to turn around a little bit a couple of years ago. We saw that reduction from a kind of steady state of 400 odd a year, and we've gone down to what seems like a steady state of about 300,000 a year. And that change was basically people stopped killing hinds. So that's been pretty helpful to the price. So the good year has been a result of things that weren't hard work, and it's been a result of hard work as well in some sort of combination. I can't tell you exactly what the combination was. I can't tell you, break it down, because I don't know. But what we'd like to do is go through, a bit of a performance review about how we think the industry performs. So, Steve Hansen would be saying, yeah, well, we got a good win, but how did people actually perform? Did you do your jobs well? So how could we do that? So for DINZ, the way we see things is we've got a strategy. Oh, okay. We've jumped ahead a little bit there. I'm losing some of my slides. I'll go back to that industry strategy, which I seem to have lost part of. But I can remember it off by heart, so you're lucky. The top line across the top of there is a confident and growing deer industry. So you've heard that a couple of times today, so I'm pleased that people have been saying that and believing that. And then we've got 4 platforms underneath the confident and growing industry. The first one is going to be about premium positioning, so I'll go through these in turn, but effectively what I'm saying is I'm going to do the performance review for the industry against our industry strategy. So how have we actually succeeded? How well have we done in terms of achieving our objectives? So on that first one there, that says premium positioning our products, and basically means, look, we would like our customers and consumers to consider New Zealand deer products to be a higher value item than the alternative they might be looking at, and pay us more for it. So that would be good. What's some examples of some work that's gone on in that sort of space? So this is the Savannah project underneath the P2P program, whereby our group of venison marketers collectively have put their heads together and decided they will develop a new market for Savannah, right in the heart of our traditional market. So this is in the Benelux and Belgium and Holland. And we've asked people, we know you don't eat game meat during the spring and summer, but what about this new product called Savannah? It's delicious, and you can put it on the barbecue in the summertime. And So that's shown a bit of traction here, as you can see. So we're premium positioned up to about 100 tonnes of venison as chilled Savannah, which fetches a substantial premium over the alternative, which is putting it in a container frozen. And it also deducts about 100 tonnes out of the frozen market when it comes around later in the year. So that's good, except that our targets for that program are here. So this is my theme for the day. So that was good, but there's a lot more to be done. So our performance was okay, but plenty more work to do. Premium positioning in velvet, you guys will have heard about this strategy a little bit yesterday because I stole Reese's presentation yesterday. But effectively, we're moving velvet from having been an undifferentiated commodity into being a critical component of really highly priced premium products in the market. And we're effectively working with the marketing companies in Korea at the moment to do that. So this is a product that I stole from Reese again. Sorry, a slide that I stole from Reese. This is a product marketed by a company called LG, which you may have heard of. And you can see there on the side of the box, in quite prominent letters, and gold letters in fact, is New Zealand velvet. This is what we kind of think of as our Intel inside strategy. So you know, most of the computers and laptops that you use will have an Intel chip on them, and Intel actually makes quite a lot of traction in marketing their valued ingredient in the laptop, and that's what we're effectively trying to do here. So that's good. Oh my goodness. The other part of that story is that great work, but there's four companies who've bought into that kind of program where they get to use our brand on the side of their box. So Reese is going to tell you later in the day about having some dozens of companies that we're working with. So we've got to move on from four, and we've got to push the envelope, and we've got to move on from about 25% of the velvet going into those healthy food premium options, and we've got to get that closer to 100. Let's see what's happening with this next slide. So let's not worry about the formatting. Market development and diversification is the next pillar. So how did we go against that? That's venison by the broad geographic market. And what you can see there looks like progress. The blue is our traditional markets in the continent, and how I've defined them there as Eurozone countries. So continental European countries that use the euro. And I don't know if you guys are interested in currency, but the euro hasn't really been a happy place for us to be trading over the last 10 or 15 or 20 years, as long as it's existed. And what you can see is that proportion of sales into the eurozone has shrunk quite consistently over the years. And the big winner there effectively has been North America, and some of that great market development work that our venison companies have done in the States particularly. So that's great. But we're still about 50% in the eurozone, right? So again, the message is good progress, plenty more work to do. Our targets are for that number to be less than 40%, and we would like to see Asia, which dominates that purple bit at the top there, we would like to see that at least over 10% in the next 5 or so years. So, good progress, plenty more to do. On the velvet side, again, you know, we've had this massive reliance on Korean traditional medicine going way back. So on the left-hand side of that chart, you can see the Korean traditional medicine was dominant over the years. So on the right-hand side, you can now see that Korean traditional medicine is actually a minority part of the markets for velvet. And we've seen that big growth in China. We've seen this big growth in the Korean healthy food market. So that's great, but if you take out the green line, the healthy foods, we've still got about 75% of velvet sales go into commodity trades. So Plenty of work to do. Oh dear. Third platform, sustainably growing on-farm value. So there's a couple of key words in there. We want people to grow their value on-farm, and we want them to do it sustainably. And let's see what we've got in terms of data on that. This is the hardest stuff to measure. Advanced parties. Everyone's heard of advanced parties, hopefully. This is probably the flagship on-farm program out of our P2P project. What you can see there is, going back to that point about team effort, farmers who've got involved in that program have really decided that they want to get involved in making changes on their farm. So you can see 90% of people who've been in the advanced party for a little while are responding by making improvements to their farm system. So that's fantastic. This is a more recent survey. I think Ernest might have stolen my thunder slightly yesterday, put this slide up. How do you think your farm business is compared to 5 years ago? And 70% of people say it's more productive. So I'm putting that down to people putting in the effort to improving their value growth on farm. Fourth platform, cohesive and respected industry. So this is the kind of the soft one, and effectively for me just means I'd love to have an industry where the people who are involved with it are really feel like they're part of something and feel proud to be part of that industry. So one of my key measures of this is the number of the people in the room today, which is fantastic. So if people want to be a part of it, I think we're winning on this. So what are some measures that I can actually put up for you? Advanced parties, so we've kind of crowed about the fact that we were well ahead of target and we had nearly 30, and that was great. So people are wanting to get involved, but if you can see this chart here, when we got ahead of our targets on numbers of advanced parties, they put the targets up, so now we're behind. So we've got maybe 25% of the active farmers in the industry involved in an advanced party, maybe more than that in terms of the number of deer. So that's great. But the big question for me is, well, what about the other 75% of people that we want to get involved in being part of the industry? So message is the same. We're pretty pleased that that's good progress against our objectives, but plenty more to do. Now the top line, we'll see how this comes out. A confident and growing deer industry is the overall vision. How do we mark ourselves against that? Well, here's that slide that Ernest stole from me yesterday, showing people's intentions about their deer farming operation. So are they confident? They certainly seem more confident. You seem more confident as a bunch than you did 5 or so years ago. People are talking about expanding their deer operations. And then I guess the final measure, confident and growing, are we growing? Well, that chart comes from Statistics New Zealand, agricultural census data, which I'm sure every one of you farmers in the room fills out religiously accurately. When you break this down by regions, you can see that there are actually no deer in the Taranaki or Nelson regions of New Zealand. So I'm not sure how they managed to have a velvet competition up there, but they do. Anyway, I've got a few question marks over this data source, but it's the only data source that we've got, and it shows a little bit of a glimmer of optimism and hope right at the right-hand side there. So it was about a 1% growth in deer numbers in New Zealand. So great, super. But you dig into that, and what that is actually that entirety of growth is accounted for in these statistics by mature stag numbers. So it doesn't suggest we've actually grown the breeding base at all. So, great. lots more work to do on that front. So that's kind of the closing part of it. So how did we go overall? What's the performance review result? Maybe a B plus if we're lucky, I reckon. So the industry's put in some good work. We've made some measurable progress. As Steve Hansen would say, we've all got our own work-ons we need to keep plugging away at. And I guess that's the message from here, is that we are pleased with progress, but from a DINZ perspective, we're really focused on keeping on plugging away at our work-ons. And so the next game next week isn't against the Sunwolves, it's against the Sharks. It's going to be a bit harder. We're looking ahead. What are the challenges on the horizon? And the board has been thinking pretty hard about that. And that's so Ian will tell you a bit about that process.
Thanks, Dan. So how are we going to stay ahead of the game? That's the interesting challenge that we've got. And Dan's already outlined that overall strategy in a various complicated picture demonstration. But at the beginning of this year, we decided as a board, to completely review that strategy, have a look at it, and see where it fell. So we spent a bit of time with the board, got some background information from industries and marketing and so on. And you can imagine that day we covered a fair amount of ground. Topics like the new government, synthetic meat, where's that place going to be? The millennials, and heard a statistic the other day, 390 millennials in the Chinese population. Social media, artificial intelligence, trade wars, real wars, Asian growth, ageing farmers, really, Mycoplasma bovis, chronic wasting disease. So we considered a whole lot of factors. And the great thing about that was at the end of the day, we finished up with the same game plan, industry strategy, and mine's confused as well, at the end of the day. So there's nothing majorly changed in that, and I think that was really reassuring for all of us, that despite all that debate and that process, we came up with a similar strategy. And a really important part of that is keeping the foot on the P2P program. But there were just a couple of little minor things, which I don't think are minor, I think they're major, one in particular, that we need to have more focus on. And with this new government and its increasing urban voter base, the urgency around the sustainable part of sustainable on-farm value creation is just going to get more and more. And for these guys, the first priority in sustainability is the environment protection. Fresh water quality is the start of it, but it will get much wider than that. You've got to think climate change, ETS, biodiversity, predator-free, management of farm wastage, and even factors like biosecurity. And we had that discussion yesterday about the importance of NATE when it comes to securing your own properties. And we certainly urge people to make sure that they're right up to speed with that. So as an industry, we're going to have a lot more to do with the environmental stewardship. And that's where the whole session this afternoon is going to be focused on. And DINZ itself is going to have to direct a lot more resource towards that particular point. And I'd have to say that we regard it right at the pretty near the top of the importance list. It's absolutely critical for us to maintain that social license as well. The second thing that we think needs a little bit more emphasis is defining our unique premium story. In these new markets that we're trying to develop, some people have never heard of New Zealand, let alone know that it's a place where we produce deer products. So what's the story that we can consistently tell them about what they might like to buy New Zealand deer products and why they are worthwhile paying more for? Just to be clear, the industry has a very clear positioning, for instance, for Savannah and for New Zealand velvet in established markets. And this is about pulling it all together and pitching the New Zealand deer industry as a whole to new customers. So those are two really important factors, those environmental considerations, and we may sigh, but in actual fact it's absolutely critically important. Another one, thank you. So there's financial implications for something like this. We've got to keep the foot to the floor on all of the strategy, particularly the P2P program. That's been particularly successful, and it's about halfway through. So we've got to keep that going because we're seeing some good gains for the industry. And we're producing less venison, so that means less income as far as DINZ is concerned. And that's been a strategy that's been adopted, so the reserves of the deer industry have actually been allowed to run down a little bit, and we've been investing that into this particular program. But we do want to increase investment in helping farmers with the environmental stewardship, and we will probably need to look at ways of getting a bit more money for that particular aspect. We will restructure the Deer Pro business for next season, and which will result in modest cost savings, and these costs will now appear transparently in DINZ levies rather than being hidden as a voluntary contribution. So as with all strategies, there's a cost associated with it, and I'd have to also congratulate Dan for keeping a very tight control on the budget, which actually makes it a lot easier as well. So summing up where we see the business in the State of the Nation address, a good year across the board, and I think we can all agree with that. Let's acknowledge it, let's celebrate it. Good progress towards our objectives, but we've still got a lot of work to do. And there are bigger challenges ahead, and we will tweak the game plan slightly to address those, particularly with more focus on the environmental stewardship.